What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Cheeky Midweeky, where you know what we're doing. We are making strength and conditioning not boring anymore, and we have somebody that I've been excited to talk about for a while. I showed him the goosebumps. If you're watching this, I'm excited, man. All right, Shawn Mishka's on the show. I've learned a lot from him. He's helped me with games. He's helped me with agility. Shawn, thank you for coming on, man. There's a lot of other things you could be doing right now.
Justin, my friend, there's not much I would rather be doing than speaking to you right now. I'm excited for this chat as well, and hopefully I can make good on those goosebumps. And even if it's just a chat between you and I, where we can wrestle with some of these thoughts and ideas. And of course, you mentioned agility in there, you mentioned games, you mentioned some other things, but I think we're going to get a lot deeper down some rabbit holes today, even though I don't know where it is that we're headed. So I'm excited to kind of find my way along with you today, and these are the best types of conversations for those in our industry to be having.
Agreed. And so I see the picture of Barry Sanders you have behind you. And why is Barry behind you?
I love the question, and I have never been asked that. Now, I have spoken about Barry, if anyone has followed my work, as the Movement Miyagi and Football Beyond the Stats and my Movement Plays of the Week each week here over the last now, what would be 11 years of that. I'm getting a little longer in the tooth and a little less hair, as you can tell. But Barry Sanders is that person who drew me into movement skill. And of course, you'll often see me retweeting Barry highlights and clips and everything else. And of course, many within our profession or across our community would point to somebody like Barry Sanders and immediately see some of the moves on moves, right? But Barry was the person that every single time I watched him, I got deeper and deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole of what it really meant to solve movement problems in sport. I think he is the most extreme exemplar of dexterity, which I'm probably going to speak about a little bit more today, or those who might be hearing me for the first time, you're going to hear me talk about it a little bit more. From Nikolai Bernstein, 1996, dexterity, the ability to solve any emerging movement problem in any situation and in any condition. And Bernstein went on to say there, Justin, that dexterity doesn't lie in the motor actions themselves. It's not just about the biomechanics. It's about the interactions with an alive environment, the interactions with an unpredictable and challenging environment. Of course, that's sport, right? And so you can kind of see when I offer that definition from Nikolai Bernstein, obviously godfather of motor control and motor learning in many ways, and somebody who obviously I get really connected to their work. But Barry was that guy, or is that guy for me, that king of dexterity, that I can't imagine somebody being more dexterous, because he was presented with a wide range of problems. And it was somebody that when I dove into his movement on the field, his movement skill on the field, I saw all these dimensions, Justin, the perceptions, cognitions, and actions all flowing into one another, but in this tight circular way with an alive environment. We saw these problem and solution dynamics, these changing states of organization. And we saw him so in the moment with like what Bruce Lee would call the what is. The interaction with the what is. And this is why you often hear me, those who might again follow me, see me a bit preachy at times. And I don't mean to get on my soapbox as often as I do, but with aliveness in bringing these types of adaptable athletes and facilitating them through the environments that we create in training. And it's not just on the field. It could be in the weight room. It could be anywhere. Because it's a worldview. We're trying to change the way that people see movement behavior any and everywhere. It isn't just right here on an NFL Sunday for a 60-minute period of time. It's people interacting with movement problems. And it's what you do, it's what I do, it's what Barry does, and it's what every extraordinary athlete that you or I have ever worked with does as well. And the more that we can kind of put that front and center, and again, that's why I often highlight Barry, because it's easy to see. Like even a monkey can watch it and be like, oh God, that guy's different, right? Like that's a different human. But it's not just that he's a different human. It's what makes him a different human. It's what underpins his movement behavior interactions with that very alive, complex, dynamic environment that obviously is very important to all of us, Justin.
What sparked your interest? Because anybody that just heard you, it's like clearly you're passionate about it, and I want you to stand on your soapbox, but how did that all start?
Yeah, really good question there. So of course, I don't know if people can see, there's a few bodybuilding trophies over here, along with a Mr. Miyagi headband as well, given to me by one of my NFL players, who actually is the person who coined the Movement Miyagi moniker. So I was a bodybuilder back in the day. Most people don't actually know this or realize this. Competed at a very, very high level as an amateur, Mr. Wisconsin, Mr. Minnesota, the national level when I was in my very early 20s. I used to be 272 pounds in the off season, walking around, like waddling around. I shouldn't say walking, even like waddling around. And that was never my passion, though it's what led me, Justin, to the field. It led me to strength and conditioning. But the bodybuilding side or powerlifting or anything else, and what was my gateway was never that which what fascinated me. It's never what got me up in the morning and drove me in a deeper, bigger vision to try to change the world in some way, shape, or form. It was watching athletes like that. However, I use this as a segue. I use the bodybuilding as a segue because when I got into the field then, as any self-respecting strength and conditioning professional would, I, of course, thought I had a lot of shit figured out. Like there was very few athletes that were bigger and stronger than me. I mean, never mind the fact that the athletes are coming to us to get better out on a field or out on a court or out on a track or rink or somewhere else. But I thought I kind of had some stuff figured out. And when I started to work with more and more athletes, particularly when I go to my Robert Frost moment back in 2007, 2008 NFL season, when I had my very first individual NFL player approach me to work with him and lock arms with him. And of course, again, I did that which what I knew. And you just saw the trophies, you just saw, or you can probably hear some of the thoughts and ideas. Bigger, stronger, all about physical output and characteristics. People might have heard me tell this story before. We chased performance metrics in a traditional sense, what we would be fed as key performance indicators, right? Some of these general motor abilities or the acquisition of them. And the player himself, who was already a 3-year starter in the National Football League, got considerably stronger, considerably bigger, and also more explosive. And that, obviously, with those who've worked with NFL players, that's not easy to do with a 3-year NFL vet at that point. But then, Justin, here's the rub. I thought he was going to go back to the league out on the field, and I was going to be doing one of these all day long because of how he was going to take over the league. And I watched him on the field, Justin, and there was not a freaking change from the 3 years prior to that to this season when I worked with him. And all of a sudden, this light bulb goes off in my head that these things that I helped him chase, such as a bigger squat and a higher vertical jump and a more explosive start and all of these things, because I was chasing the wrong rabbit, we caught the wrong one, right?
Ooh.
And so there, it was like I had to shift my perspective. Now, I could keep going down that road that everyone else was traveling. Like we were chasing combine metrics. It's why you hear me get a little preachy there on social media as well about the bullshit world that is combine training, right? Like none of that really ended up mattering when he stepped out on a field for that 60-minute period of time. So that Robert Frost moment where two roads were diverged in the trail, fortunately, Justin, I went down the road less traveled, which was starting to chase movement skill at the center of everything I did, and that movement skill being on the field. Now, this was also a little short-sighted. Like I got myself a little too big for my britches early on there as well. We started chasing perfect practice, perfect practice makes perfect. You kind of hear it, right? Technical models, technical execution. And I was dissecting movement, Justin, through the biomechanics and the motor actions themselves. I had Bernstein's books. I just wasn't freaking reading them. I was stuck in other stuff. And I hate, not calling out any elephants in the room here, but I was reading the Verkhoshanskys and the Bondarchuks and these types of things. And now one of the quotes that actually ended up sticking out to me comes from Verkhoshansky as well as Mel Siff from the old Super Training Bible, which is Super Training that we all know, right? Yeah. And in there, I think it's page 96, maybe 97, they say sport is a problem-solving activity where movements are used to solve those respective problems, right? And so within there, I had to actually start to shift my perspective ever so slightly. But it didn't really resonate for me yet because I started chasing perfection. The athletes I worked with, we were trying to repeat actions, repeat a means of a solution till we couldn't get it wrong, till it was automatized and that there was nothing that could be done that was, I guess, incorrect. I use those words very deliberately and intentionally, incorrect movement. And so we chased that perfection. And I did it religiously with the athletes that I worked with. It wasn't until 2012, Justin, there happens to be a player that many people know that I ended up working with at one point or another, and one of the greatest running backs to play the game, especially one of the greatest running backs of this generation, and Adrian Peterson. I'm watching from the Metrodome Stadium, and I'm watching movement actions unfold on the field. And I realized, again, this light bulb moment, this second Robert Frost moment, if you will, that many of the athletes I was partnering with were likely performing in spite of what we were doing as opposed to because of. And it was there that, now this is a question, Justin, that haunts my world every single day. No matter what I see from an athlete on field, I end up asking myself this question over and over and over again. Is the athlete performing because of me and the work I'm doing with him, or despite of me and the work that I'm doing? And on that day in 2012, at the end of the season, and I had a number of players who were very, very successful in that given year, and actually on paper still probably to this day is my most successful year. So people be like, why in the hell are you changing anything? Because I didn't like the answer to that question that I was asking. Because of or in spite of. And it ended up leading me to chase down the Bernstein work much, much deeper and start to really think about what it meant to me. People hear me talk about Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee, in my perspective, was really the first skill acquisition specialist that worked as a coach and as a facilitator to facilitate and guide movement skill that is authentic, attuned, and adaptable to the what is of the world. So I got into this work. I got in the work of J.J. Gibson, ecological psychology, he would say, we perceive to act, we act to perceive. We would get into work of Keith Davids, who now I'm blessed to be able to call a close friend. And then the work of Keith Davids, Eduardo Ruggio, and some of these individuals, Michael Turvey, God rest his soul, people like this that really changed the way that I viewed movement skill and skilled movement behavior on a football field and what it meant to be skillful. It was about the interaction. It was about the adaptive, functional relationship with a complex, chaotic, and changing environment, because that's what sport is. And now, even if there are some out here who are coaching track and field athletes, no two problems in sport are ever the same, I promise you. Therefore, neither are any two solutions. I don't care if you're running in a straight line for 100 meters. No two problems are ever the same when we look at it at a certain level. The athlete is not the same. If we use that quote, we never step in the same river twice, for we're not the same man and the river's not the same either, right? The environment's not the same. The opponents aren't the same. Fatigue, pressure, anxiety, all of these things enter the mix. All of these constraints will coalesce together to create this canvas that tells us what kind of movement skill is that athlete going to paint with today, and how adaptable can it be to the opportunities as well as the perturbations in that changing environment. So Justin, this, again, long-winded story here, probably on a number of different winding roads, but this started to create this new refined perspective that I have now with this movement problem solver paradigm, where now for me, the movement behavior which emerges in sport can be reconceptualized as a problem solving activity where perceptions, cognitions, and actions will all become intertwined, interwoven, and integrated to carry out these movement strategies and solutions that are connected to information in the world about that changing environment. You hear information movement coupling, you hear affordances, and me talk about that. Like, it's not just jargon. It actually means something for our filter and our lens for viewing movement behavior that takes place anywhere. So yeah, I don't even remember what your original question was, my friend. I just got going and I had like a blackout moment probably.
One of the things I just wrote down there was repetition without repetition. That's something that you've talked about a lot.
I have talked about that a lot. And again, Nikolai Bernstein was the person who coined that idea. And Bernstein said way back in '67 in the book Coordination and Regulation of Movements, he said movement behavior or practice shouldn't be about repeating the means of a solution, but instead it should be in the process of solving that problem again and again, or repeating the process of solving that problem. So you can see this distinction. Bernstein said in '67, and it was probably well before that because he actually died in that year. So I doubt that he said it right when he was on his grave, right? Like I think he might have. I mean, I hope I go in that way, right? Like he's saying something right? that stands the test of time in this field.
Oh, that'd be so sweet.
But you know, this idea of rep without rep, he told us long ago that repetition by rote should have been discarded, and it should be discarded. So repetition by rote, mere repetition of calculated movement, meaning motor actions or biomechanics, should be discarded. Bernstein told us from his research with repetition without repetition. He watched the blacksmith that we see hammer away at the anvil and no two movement problems, which is something as simple as hitting a freaking anvil with a hammer for a skilled craftsman, was ever repeated. Now think about how much that differs from that which what we ask our athletes to do. And what do we do as coaches? Chase the dog or let the dog chase its tail over and over and over again. It's not perfect yet. You got to squeeze out this little minutia of biomechanics. This has to change. That wasn't repeated, etc., right? It's all about the biomechanics. It's all about the motor actions. And I believe that if people just shift their perspective ever so slightly to even inject more rep without rep, Justin, to your point, like rep without rep lives and breathes as an inherent reality of movement behavior in sport. It's up to us to harness it. That's what self-organization is. It's up to us to chase it and channel it for the athlete to create that canvas for them to use that rep without rep to become more skillful, more adaptable, ultimately more robust, no matter what the performance environment asks of us, or asks of them, rather.
You need CEUs to remain certified. At Strength Coach Network, both of our long-form education courses, Fundamentals 1 and Fundamentals 2, both have 2.0 CEUs to the NSCA in Category C. When you complete the learning and you complete the learning check, you will earn your 2.0 CEUs. That is 33% of the CEUs you need in a 3-year reporting period. Click the link down below to learn more about both courses. Hawkin Dynamic is the best option if you're trying to get any force plate data or if you're trying to collect any isometric mid-thigh pulls. Not only can you do isometric mid-thigh pulls for the lower body, but I call it an isometric mid-thigh pull for your upper body, where you're able to do an isometric push-up into something where your back is pushing into a bar and your hands are on the force plate. I utilized Hawkin's force plates and Hawkin's software when I was at Towson, still utilize it now when I'm at Goldfinch. If you're using the other competitors, I don't know what you're doing. Hawkin's customer service is second to none. Hawkin's software and their hardware, again, second to none. Check them out in the link down below. If you're looking to train your athletes in person or remote, you need to make sure that you're utilizing TeamBuildr. I have had TeamBuildr since 2019 and still utilize it with my remote athletes. This makes everything simple, from the ability to program, have videos right there, wellness questionnaires. Loved being able to have it in person at the rack at Towson, and being able to have it in person now at Goldfinch. This has made my life easier as a coach. If you're still printing on paper, I don't know what you're doing. If you have a different software company, again, I don't know what you're doing. Check out TeamBuildr down in the link below. One of the things that I wrote down here then is like, how can us strength coaches connect with sport coaches? Because I mean, I got the damn book over here, Practice Perfect, where, like you said, perfect practice makes perfect. Like, it's not, practice doesn't make permanent, perfect practice makes permanent. And that gets drilled in your head. And then I remember, you know, seeing coaches do their EDDs, everyday drills. And it's like, oh, we got to teach I specifically remember like these linebackers getting taught the exact quote unquote way to go and take on a lineman. And it's like, no, they're not. It's just, that was part of the problem when I was at Towson, because I'd be like, listen, coaches, like I'd try to bring it up in a respectful way in a staff room and be like, hey, like, talking about these things, it was almost just like, shut up, nerd. Like, like that's what I got dealt with.
Well, and this is obviously what leads me again in another rooftop that I shout off of, for the inclusion or the need for what I would believe to be a skill acquisition specialist within and across any staff in any high performance sporting environment or organization. The skill acquisition specialist who's actually going to assess the practice environment and the practice tasks that are presented to the athletes in that environment to assess their level of transferability or their likelihood of learning, right? Like, to have somebody who's an unbiased individual, but who wants the same thing as the coaches, and even a strength and conditioning professional, to begin to look at things in this perspective, Justin, we have to build more bridges so we have more transdisciplinary teams, right? Yeah. Even if we look at many of the high performance sport departments across the league or across sports, we often find that the voice is muffled of that high performance sports department. Like, the coach at the end of the day is going to do exactly what they did to you, Justin. And it's like, that's not a high performance sports department. It should be one where there's this cross pollination between those who know something about high performance, such as yourself bringing it to the linebackers coach, but also to be able to have that bridge to communicate why it is that we're doing it in this way. I mean, think of most of those football position coaches. Why do they get so damn butthurt when I bring these things up? It's because they're just doing what they've always done. They're just doing what they were taught from their mentor, their coach. They've never actually stopped and asked why. I mean, we look at indie drills, EDDs, as you would say. Like, I go to NFL practices during the training camp time, and I go and watch my players. I go from place to place, training camp to training camp. And I would, during indie periods, I would rather run into traffic in front of oncoming buses, because it is painful to watch. Like, how does any of this look, feel, and act and unfold like it will when they get out in the field and it's live time? And they're like, we got to do it every day. We got to master it. We got to have perfect practice. In this isolated, decontextualized perspective, like, no one has really figured this piece and part out yet. Whereas I've proposed over time that if anyone in the National Football League would begin to look at their indie drills, even just starting there. Now, there's other layers that we can certainly add to 1v1s and some of the combo work that then is done afterwards. And even when we talk about creating the right problem to stretch the player to their requisite challenge point for them to grow and learn. But learning is very rarely the objective in most of these training environments. Like, when we look at what they're doing, But shouldn't learning be what everything is centered around? But the problem is, of course, just like the question that I had to ask myself, Justin, in spite of or because of? Very few want to actually do that, because what's going to happen when that NFL player, what happened? Like, I have no doubts that Barry Sanders is a product of his competitive environment, the competitive environment he was placed under. Think about it. Detroit Lions, he had maybe one of the worst offensive lines you could possibly imagine, one of the worst offenses with the Heisman Trophy winning running back, right? What do we see in the highlights? Freaking dude right up in his lap, linebacker who shoots the gap unattended to, and he's right there within a foot and a half from Barry. Barry has to juke him out of his jock, leave him standing. Boom, there's another guy there. Boom, he's got to move another way. Like, you can see what I'm kind of getting at here. Like, he became a product, his movement skill, that is, became a product of his shit-ass environment that he was in on Sundays. But no one actually asks that question, right? Like, you look at Barry Sanders' film from the big Oklahoma State Heisman Trophy winning year when he averaged whatever it was, 8 yards a carry, and the nearly 2,700 yard season. Like, people don't ask the questions. Like, one of these doesn't look like the other. You often saw Barry in the open field just running to daylight, but he gets to the Detroit Lions, and all of a sudden he has to change his movement behaviors quite significantly. It channeled that dexterity that we are talking about. Now, this is a bit of a tangent, but what I'm getting to here, Justin, is oftentimes we see the players on an NFL Sunday, the ones that are exemplars. We could use numerous ones. We could use a Christian McCaffrey, who was my mover of the year this last year. We could look at and kind of trace back anybody that we think about. Patrick Mahomes, you know, like, think about the Lamar Jackson. Think about these like really dexterous, really skillful, really adaptable players. And we might immediately trace back to what they're doing in training and just think to ourselves, that is what is channeling this skill. And now certainly it's contributing to it. But ultimately, the best athletes you've ever worked with and the best athletes I've ever worked with, at some point, they are going to do what athletes do, which is adapt, which is compensate. The players that are playing on an NFL Sunday are the world's best adapters. And ultimately, they're the world's best compensators. So based on the competitive environment, they're going to go and flourish anyway. The cream is going to rise to the top to a certain degree. And the coaches, such as those that are using these everyday drills in the indie period, are going to point back to it and say, what are you talking about? This led to that. Like, there's some sort of miracle happening between practice and competition. You know, my good friend Stu McMillan, a couple of years ago, had this little graphic that he sent me where there's somebody on a board, like, here we do all these equations, and then a miracle happens right here, and then this is what gets spit out. And that's exactly what we think about with most sport practices. It's what we think about with most strength and conditioning means and methods as well. Like, we often look to that which what unfolded, and we justify or validate what we did. A number of years back, I consulted for an NFL team, and I was brought in to simply filter their indie periods. And Justin, the same experience that you had with the linebackers that you brought up earlier was essentially what I got. Now, I went for the first several days, indie period to indie period, position group to position group, and just writing down notes. Here's what we could do to potentially make this more alive, and to put it through this checklist of what contemporary motor learning literature would tell us could or should be done a little differently. I'll never forget it. The very first meeting I had to then communicate with the position coach, I sat down with the defensive line coach. And now, mind you, Justin, for the last several days, I watched for 12 minutes them roll out an agility ladder and his defensive linemen literally punch at the frickin' sky as they go through it. Like, I'm not exaggerating. We're talking about an NFL defensive line coach who did this. Now you can imagine what I wanted to say, but I tried to even tone that down. And I'm like, Coach, can we maybe change some of the things? Like I had to pull, it was like pulling threads here. Like, what can I find that at least like gives them a little bit of positivity with this bullshit that I'm watching unfold? And I remember starting to communicate through them, and I'm putting in the nicest way possible to him. Basically wanting to say, like, listen, dude, you're a freaking moron. Like, I don't know how much money you're making, but my goodness, like, these defensive linemen, what are you doing here? And he literally went back to 30 years prior when he was on a staff that won a Super Bowl. And he said, do you have a Super Bowl ring? And I'm like, no, I don't have a Super Bowl ring. But number one, what transpired in the last 30 years that you don't have another one? You know, like I didn't say that, but my point with him was like, that's what you're using? Like that's what you're using as your litmus test? That 3 decades ago, I was on a staff where, and I won't even call out what team it was, but it was a very, very, very prominent defensive unit that happened to have a few players on it that probably were doing some other things off the field that I don't think we would probably circle the wagon around, like where we're like, oh, look at this exemplar of performance. But yet on the field, and this is kind of my point, Justin, like on the field, that guy's going to do what they do. I even talk about, and I've said this before, to kind of say that, which what I did even with some of the athletes I work with, there's some that at some point, like with an Adrian Peterson, like at a certain point, Justin, it's not about Shawn and what he can tell somebody like that to do, because at a certain point, Adrian's going to Adrian, you know, like, and he's, I'm not saying we can't channel better or more functional behavior. I absolutely wholeheartedly believe we can. Our environments should facilitate more skillful behavior, just like it should, just like our strength and conditioning and weight room measures, or what we're doing across that, should help to channel the expression of these physical characteristics and qualities. But what I am trying to say is, like, we have to keep auditing ourselves every single day with what we're doing and how we're doing it, and be honest about how much it's actually helping to underpin what we see on the field. And if we did that, I do believe that position groups would have to change what they're doing. They absolutely would, because very few can actually look at what's happening there and say, this looks, feels, acts, and unfolds anything remotely close to like it will when they're on the field and when they actually have to solve those problems. And I guess that's kind of that crusade then that I'm on with that, with like the skill acquisition specialist side. It's not that everything that everyone is doing is wrong. So I don't want any of the listeners kind of take that, right? But what I am saying is, what can we do better? What are we missing the boat on? How do we need to actually refine and evolve our frame and lens of analysis? If we did that to be on the performer-environment relationship, as opposed to just the performer, just the organism, if we did that on the interactions that are taking place there, I think we would begin to change our practice training environments to be those that are ripe for learning and ripe for adaptability, or requiring adaptability from our athletes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a sport coach either. And hearing you talk about that and then just thinking as you're talking, it's like, I mean, Indy could almost literally just be take scenarios from a game. If you're a D lineman, like, all right, practice when you have a long arm and you're on the right side of the defense and you have to keep the tackle inside. And now it's going to be a run play to the outside, shed him and go to the outside, or shed him, go to the, like, just create all these different scenarios from a game. Okay, you're going to rush, but then you're going to go backpedal and go into covering the flat because it's zone 3. Like, isn't that just what you need to do?
Yeah. And those are the problems that player is going to be faced with, right? So again, we talk about slices or snippets of the game, or we did in a 2022 paper on applying an ecological approach to American football. Slices and snippets of the game are exactly what you're referring to here, where we can manipulate constraints. So we repeat that process of solving that problem again and again by changing aspects of our degrees of freedom. What we're sensitive to, how we might be intending to act, the decisions we make, ultimately the different strategies that we have to be able to coordinate and control in solving those problems. So now what we would do is rep that out, not looking like what you're talking about, that slice or snippet. No two problems the same, neither are any two solutions. We allow that variability to exist there, both with the problem as well as the solver. We allow the athlete to search and explore their various ways of solving that, so they become more adept at being adaptable. That is the requirement, right? Adaptability within adaptability. We're expecting this constant adaptability from the athlete because it's a functional reciprocal relationship. Now, all of a sudden, we should have what I would refer to as an alive movement problem, where we don't exactly know how that problem is going to unfold. I always tell position coaches that if your players get up to a drill, the front of the drill, and they know where they're going to go, when they're going to go there, and how they're supposed to go there, it's bullshit. Stop it. Like, strength and conditioning coaches taking this with agility. Same thing. Your athlete starts the activity, and if they know when they're going to go, how they're going to go, when it ends, and what's going to happen from A to Z, it's probably not oriented towards facilitating the transferability of agility. Like, it's probably not an agility drill. It's something that you're doing as a coach to maintain control, right? Like, you want this control, and you want to sort of expect that, again, that miracle that I talked about with Stu McMillan earlier, like there's stuff that we're going to do in practice and training over here. Boom, some sort of magic step happens for transfer, and then it's going to happen over here. It just doesn't work that way. The problems and the solutions are constantly changing. The states of organization on both sides, the problem disposition in and across American football or any sport is going to be different every single time. And so if you even just take it, it's kind of like what Bruce Lee would say, boards don't hit back, right? And if your drill doesn't actually present a challenge or a perturbation to your movement system, it's probably not for agility, right? Now, it might be for the expression of something else. I'm not sugarcoating that, but don't call it an agility drill if there's no agility demand in it. and I guess that's what I see so many coaches doing. And Justin, you and I have both seen it. There's probably some people listening right now who are like really getting a little irritated with me because I'm essentially calling it out. Like, we want to assess what people are doing in and across their training environment so it has transfer. Call it as it is. Call it for what it is. It could be for the expression of strength or explosiveness, or maybe you're trying to control the load or the demands of it. And I get that. There's a time and a place for that, certainly. But it's not an agility activity. It's not an activity where somebody's actually going to be required to be more agile. And I find that many strength and conditioning professionals are as guilty as position coaches in this way. They think that what they're doing is actually going to facilitate that skill, and it really isn't. And that's why I often say, you might have heard me tweet this as well. Typically, when I start conversations in presentations, I ask the whole group, how do you view movement behavior in sport? And how does that view impact how you coach and teach, or what your training environment looks like? Because those questions will tell us if somebody believes in perfect practice, and that's going to impart some sort of model upon them to execute technically sound and proficiently, they probably aren't going to be very receptive to what I have to say. That's why they are watering things down. That's why they are doing the agility ladder. That's why they are doing these change of direction drills on cones or on bags and the like, because they believe something very, very fundamentally different than I do. They believe it's about the athlete and the athlete alone, this organism, some sort of beaten path in the brain that they're just going to call upon in an automatic fashion. Whereas I believe that every movement problem in the world is alive. Even if I walk down the sidewalk right now, I've walked down the sidewalk in front of my house for the last 4 years, but the environment is going to look and feel slightly different. And if that information that is out there, such as like I'm deathly scared of snakes, if a snake is on the sidewalk, I might have walked across that sidewalk and walked that path. It's no longer about the organism. It's about the organism environment relationship. I have to do something. This is going to perturb my behavior in some way. And think about that as sort of an analogy for a sport, right? And then we also think about this, Justin. We think about that perfect practice model. We all say, well, it's just like riding a bike. You know how to ride a bike. It's the motor skill that we all go back to. But how did we learn how to ride a bike in most cases, every single one of us? We fell off the fucking bike. We went downhill, we went uphill. If you were from Wisconsin, like I am, you rode your bike in the snow. You rode your bike on ice. You rode your bike in the summer. You rode your bike on gravel, blacktop, dirt roads, whatever it might be, down the cornfield, whatever. Like, you learn to ride a bike by challenging yourself through different situations and problems that you interacted with. So you learn how to turn the handlebars on the bike differently based on the surface you were feeling underneath you, based on your own fatigue when you were a kid and you were riding that bike over and over and over again. And by the end of the day, you rode that bike from place to place, and you no longer are riding it in the same way as you did when you started the day and you were ready to go hang out with your friends, right? Like, you were exposed to a wide variety of situations and conditions. So now I haven't rode a bike in like 10 years. My wife made me ride her bike because she wanted me to check it out for the spring, right? I literally haven't rode a bike in like a decade. But I can get on the bike and guess what? I can ride it. And I can be attuned and sensitive to, well, are the tires flat? Is it turning okay? Are the brakes work? Is it safe for my wife to drive or ride rather? And the reason I can do that is because I learned long ago that this bike and I are this mutual reciprocal relationship with the environment. And if I can speak to that information and let it speak to me, and we have this mutual reciprocal exchange, I can learn something out about how I'm interacting with those problems. That bike riding example is exactly what we should take for our athletes if we're going to facilitate more adaptable behavior for them on the field, more skillful behavior for them on the field. But again, people will say, oh, it's just like riding a bike.
Yeah, no, and hearing you say all that, like, I'll admittedly say I hadn't been taught it. I think it's kind of like the traditional way of teaching is, okay, I remember being taught like, oh, you do programmed agility, then reactive agility. That was just what I was taught. And then I was like, right. Wait a minute. Once I was actually taught properly, I'm like, that programmed agility doesn't make sense. Reactive agility is redundant. So like, let's educate the masses. And to me, so it's like, I give people an exception, like, okay, maybe you don't know. So now educate them. And then when they still don't, like one of the guys that I work with at Towson who was in charge was calling it a box agility drill. And I'm like, hey man, like, let's try to like, let's be, pushing the field forward. Like, you're in charge. Like, let's actually do the things the right way. And like, it didn't happen. And so this is why Strength Coach Network exists. This is why the Cheeky Midweeky exists. So coaches can know, like, okay, if you don't know, because I didn't know at one point. And shout out to DeMarco for helping me learn about it. He exposed me to these things because for the longest time, he and I were not exposed to it from the coaches above us. And then once we learned better and we knew better, so anybody that's listening, if you don't know better, it's okay.
No doubt.
But if you know better and then don't do better, that's when you're doing a disservice to the athletes, to the field, and you need to change or get out.
Yeah, I think, you hit the nail on the head there, and you were much more straight to the point of what I was trying to say, which is, it's about the evolution of our craft. It's about the evolution of the field as a bigger whole. That's obviously why I was as complimentary as I was to you before we even got on the air about the Strength Coach Network. Because when you think about what you're trying to do, it's about bettering oneself. And now we're preaching to the choir right now, likely for those who are listening this far in. And so to that point, shout out to you all, no matter where you fall on that side of the fence. And I think that's exactly right, Justin. Like, there are a lot of people who should know better. There are a lot of people who should do better, but they choose not to because it either risks their job or it risks ruffling a few feathers. You know, that's obviously why I appreciate you in the way that I do. And I said so earlier, because you're willing to get out of the traditional dogmatic ways of thinking, shake up that freaking snow globe, and look at how things fall a little bit more clearly as things happen and go on. And we're all on a path and journey to learning. I'm learning every single day, so I don't want anyone to think that, who might be listening, that I got it all figured out by any means. Stuff like this and trying to figure out why and how number 20 on the Detroit Lions could carry out the types of movement strategies and solutions that he did is still what drives me each and every day. Like this mind F of trying to figure it out and tell the movement problem solving story for players like that, or from players like that.
Looking to expand your education further, but you don't want to pay the massive fees of going back to school? At Strength Coach Network, we have 2 long-form education courses that both cost less than one course taught to you by an online school. If you click down below to learn more about Fundamentals 1 or Fundamentals 2, you will be able to sign up for our education course that has over 20 hours of educational content brought to you by some of the biggest names in the field. Dr. Brian Mann, Zach Daycant, Jeff Moyer, Terrence Kennel, and many more inside of this course, all for less than the price of one course at a college university. Are you expanding and need more equipment inside your current room? Or are you building a new weight room and you need to get some equipment? You need to look no further than Powerlift. I had Powerlift equipment when I was at Harvard, Iowa, and at the University of Maryland. I'm currently utilizing their stuff right now. I'm telling you, Powerlift strong, Powerlift made here in America, here in the great state of Iowa, made, manufactured. You have the ability for customization, whether it's on the bench, whether it's on the upholstery, whether it's on the bumpers, across the rack. There are countless options, making sure it's designed to your specific brand. It's Powerlift made, it's Powerlift strong, it's not cheap like all the other competitors, and the people inside of Powerlift are people that you want to be with. Check them out in the link down below. Are you or your athletes waking up too hot or too cold in the middle of the night? Or are you looking for a sleep tracker option that doesn't involve wearing a ring or a wrist or a watch, something on your body? Then you need to look no further than the company SleepMe. SleepMe makes chili pads, which keep your bed cold or warm depending on what you want. And they also have a tracker that will go underneath that pad, so it will be able to tell how well you slept. When I did a little study on myself with the Oura Ring and with the SleepMe tracker, they were within 97% of each other, and it was actually pretty astonishing how similar the two were. I love my chili pad. It makes me sleep great. I sleep cold. I actually wake up cold now. I haven't woke up warm. And pretty much ever since I've had it, I don't like sleeping on the road because I don't have the ability to use my chili pad. Bunch of former colleagues back at Towson got it. My stepmother got it. Check it out in the link down below.
But again, it's when you do have those Robert Frost moments, when those light bulbs go off or someone exposes you to a different way of thinking, be willing to kind of absorb what is useful there. Be totally cool discarding what is not useful, you know, as Bruce Lee would say.
Yes. Yep.
And then add what is uniquely your own. But be sure you absorb what is useful after you put it through your own filter of your experience in your own form of life, your own perspective, your own lens.
And I think the coaches that don't want to, they're the ones that are too egotistical because they forget that it is about the athlete. Like at the end of the day, like, yeah, cool. You work with Adrian Peterson. Cool. Like working with awesome athletes. It's like, it's about helping that athlete do what they love and were put on this earth to do. So like help them do that thing. And then it also helps the fans and the people watch. Like it's when you actually take yourself out of the situation, you do a better job serving those in the situation and you get to be in the situation longer. It's that simple.
It really is. And of course, you know, especially when we see those that are kind of spinning their wheels, you know, you and I both go to plenty of conferences and conventions and the like. And then when we do, we hear the same things being regurgitated. We hear, essentially, we know exactly what's going to be said at most conferences when we see the title and the name of a given presentation, right? Like, we all got to do better. Like, we got to do better to start having more of these types of interactions and dialogues. We got to have more discussions from different perspectives and points of view as opposed to just preaching in the echo chambers that are certain conferences and organizations and the like. And again, think of it, when we both gone to plenty of conferences, and what is the best time about those events? It's your time networking outside of the sessions themselves. But what if we made some of these sessions to be something where we're turning in for a learning opportunity for ourselves?
Yep.
But instead, it's like this pat on the back type of thing that comes there, like, oh, yep, that coach at this prominent college is doing exactly what I do too. Good on me. I'll get there someday. He achieved this success because of X, Y, and Z, but we're not actually asking the right questions.
Well, that's why we're having the brain power. That's why we're having the Brain Power event at Powerlift's headquarters, June 21st and 22nd, because it's like we're actually going to have coaches talk about different topics. We have a chiropractor coming in talking about concussions. We have a nutritionist coming in to talk about feeding your athletes when you don't have a budget. We have somebody coming in talking about training high school athletes, a former strength coach in college talking about working with firefighters in the tactical setting, an athletic trainer like, hey, when should you and shouldn't you send your athletes to the athletic trainer in a lifting session? Like real programmable, actionable items that coaches can take away. And it's not the same exact conversation that happens at most presentations, regardless how big or how small they are.
Yeah.
Because it's like, listen, we know strong is good. We get it. Like being strong in the weight room is good. Like that's awesome. It's never going to stop being strong in the weight room's good. Fast on the field's good. Like let's start to unpack more of it.
Well, even that transdisciplinary work that you're talking about and referring to here, right? Like,
which is important for everybody to listen. He said trans, it's not interdisciplinary where it's this conveyor belt. It's everybody looking at the same problem at the same time. It's different. Your words matter, people.
Yeah, they absolutely do. I mean, words were obviously invented for a certain reason. We have to look at what they mean. That's why when people say something and call out, affordances or attunement, ecological dynamics, degeneracy, like people are like, well, you're just using big words to sound smarter than everyone else. No, it's because there's 40 to 60 years of research that talks about these words. They mean something. They have purpose, much to your point, Justin. Like, and we got to be deliberate and intentional about the words we're using to describe what it is that we want to do and how it is that we're doing it. And I guess to that point, number one, credit to y'all for organizing an event such as that. I did the same thing with the Sport Movement Skill Conference back in 2018 in our first year. Our whole theme was around integration. It was an integration of everyone pulling up a seat at the table to have conversations. So when you look at something, you start to see what other people might be seeing. It's not in, it's about what you're seeing when you're looking at it, but then also meeting others from where their perspective and point of view is. But so often we stay in our little silos, our echo chambers again, right? Like, no, this is the weight room. We're the strength and conditioning coaches. Sports medicine people, you stay over there in the athletic training table, in the athletic training room. Sports scientists, just bring me your computer data when you're ready with it. Sport coaches, I mean, don't even get me started. Like, very few of that actual interaction. Like, these are the interactions that are going to push the field forward. The exact thing that you talked about. And I think it's even in there that learning to lock arms with each other, especially those that view the world differently than us, is how more success can and should happen to get closer and closer to high performance, from my perspective.
Amen to that. And, kind of a segue to that, you talked about the bodybuilding. And so like segueing into that world for you, what would be some things that sport coaches can learn from a strength coach that did lose weight, that competed? Like, I remember specifically when I was in school, Dr. Ellen Robinson, who was my program advisor, was like, listen, you want to learn how to lose weight? Talk to a bodybuilder who like literally knows how, like, so that's the foresight behind me asking this question to you.
Yeah, really, really good question. I would say for me, the biggest thing that I got and took away was the underpinning psychological characteristics that are necessary and needed to compete at that highest level. Like, it helped me connect the dots to understand the types of players that I now obviously am trusted and locking arms with and studying. it's the psychological component that goes with those ebbs and flows and the nonlinearity that you're speaking to, Justin. The off season to the in season, the 8,600 calories when I'm 272 pounds down to 4,000 calories when I'm trying to compete at 230, 235. Like, it's this transition in the nonlinearity of the human behavior around it. The other thing I will say, if anybody knows a little something about my bodybuilding career, is it ended actually very early. Even though I wasn't passionate about bodybuilding, I was pretty good at it. So at 24 years old, being on the verge of knocking on a pro card and like getting to that point or place where I was being featured in magazines, and my body started to break down because of how long I had been at it. And instead of me changing what I was doing, I just said, like, this is just the world of a bodybuilder, right? It's going to be feast or famine. It's going to be a war of attrition every single day. So instead of actually equipping myself with the education to be better, I just kept running myself into the ground deeper. Not missing workouts, not prioritizing.
Why would you? You're not soft. Come on, bro.
Well, and that's just it, right? Like, I didn't. So the first time I ever lost a bodybuilding competition, I didn't have a single cheat meal from then on out because I would never wanted to have that feeling again.
Bro.
Like off seasons or in season.
How long did you go between competitions?
So I would typically go 1 year unless a major significant injury would derail me. But in each one of those years, so again, I went my first Mr. Wisconsin, I was at 18 years old. I was 160 pounds, Justin, competing as a lightweight. I won the lightweight division at a very young age. Then I literally, Justin, my body from that time to 24. Now throw out those numbers of how much weight I gained. Now, like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm going to tell the world, and I'm okay telling them, like, I had a little bit of help and assistance and enhancement in that. Again, I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to assume that the people out there are an idiot that are going to.
They're good restoratives. That's what they're called. Good restoratives.
But think about what that did. It was like this dog chasing its own tail again. I just did that, what everybody else was doing. Stick to the diet, stick to the plan, don't miss the workouts, work through the injury. Like, and all of that led to me breaking down. I was trying to chase the perfection, whether it was on stage or whether it was in the preparation to get there. But what I want people to learn from this, and what I learned from it, was that the world is messier than that. There was going to be nonlinearities. And the nonlinearities is what brings the journey some worth, but also makes us sustainable and robust through it. So it was in those ebbs and flows, instead of listening to my body when my body was telling me that enough was enough, I tore my glute off my damn hip and had my family, no joke, bring all of my meals to the hospital when I was in there for days, brought dumbbells from the gym so I would not miss working out because I was I was sponsored. That's how I was getting paid. But instead of actually listening to my body, like, how does somebody at 23 years old tear their glute from their hip in a leg press? And also I did 6 reps after it tore as well, mind you. Like, to the point where I'm literally crawling from the leg press to the front desk at this gym. Like, think about the psychotic nature of that. Like, nope, can't show that weakness, right? But instead of actually listening, like, think about how big of a moron I was. I'm like, no, bring me my meals, Mom. Like, go make me my meals, and then I need my siblings to bring me dumbbells. Like, make sure that you can smuggle this stuff up 3 flights of stairs at the hospital. Like, what in the world? Like, who thinks about that? But I say that, Justin, it was that psychological characteristic. I have the words iron will tattooed on my forearm for a reason. Like, I was so iron-willed and driven to that. Like, that is what I should have harnessed, but I wasn't able to get out of my own way. And I have players like that as well. Just like I'm sure you've had players like that also, that refuse to kind of listen to either what their body is saying or what their coach is saying, or maybe what their mentor might be saying. But instead, my bodybuilding career could have and probably should have lasted much longer. But it didn't last past 25 years old because of the damage I had done in that 6 years, 7 years of competition. And it was my own doing. It was my own fault, and even just prioritizing variability in the weight room, which I didn't do. Now, I was still pretty mobile, and I mentioned waddling earlier, but at a guest posing at 260 pounds, like I did a backflip and did the splits on stage. So I was still fairly flexible. But if you were to tell me to run from point A to point Z, I would have looked at you like a dick growing out of your forehead. Like, what are you talking about? Why would I ever do that? Like, I actually, when I have talked to bodybuilders now, or those that are aspiring bodybuilders, I think that there's something to the harnessing of variability that will make the system that much more robust to be able to handle and sustain those efforts for longer and more. And I think it's there that we can learn something from it as well. If I were to go back in retrospect, it wouldn't be the same thing over and over and over again, whether it was in diet, whether it was in training. Like, it was 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. every single day I was in the weight room. In the morning, it was morning cardio, always at 6:30. It was an afternoon nap at 1:30 every single day without fail. It was locking myself in my room by myself for 90 minutes to visually rehearse what workout was going to come. Like, everything was about perfect practice, but it led to me being very, very burnt out. Now, some of it is, again, because I'm not overly passionate about the sport of bodybuilding necessarily. I just wanted to be really, really good at anything I could if I was going to do it. And that's kind of what led me to that point or place. But now, hopefully, I'm doing a little something more that I'm passionate and energetic about, which is, studying guys like that or them working and locking arms with players. Not at that level, because no one is Barry, as we talked about earlier, but players that obviously aspire to kind of chase that expression of dexterity actually in their sport.
I mean, AP was almost like during his prime, like was as close to it as possible. Like, the dude could run you over, the dude could juke you, the dude could run away from you. Like, he was different, man.
Yeah, AD is, and like, so we call him all day in the training environment.
Oh yeah, AD.
Yeah, so we call him AD. Yeah. Most people know it as AP, and he'll answer to both for sure. But Adrian
all
was
day
that
AP.
Yeah, Adrian was that kind of cat, like, who always wanted more as well. And I remember even the best versions of Adrian were the at least from my perspective and my lens, were not the years where he was necessarily running people over like that in the early years. And that was obviously before I had worked with him as well. It was later on when he started to lose some of the physical qualities and characteristics, when he started to get a little longer in the tooth, as it happens with running backs, Justin, that he actually had to find the coordination, control, and organization of variable movement skills. Like, he can no longer solve the problems in the same way. Like, some of my favorite Adrian clips are from him in 2017, as hopefully Buddy Morris, shout out to Buddy Morris here, will be listening to this, when Adrian went from the Saints to the Cardinals mid-year, and I did a movement play of the week on Adrian in week, I think it was 7 in 2017, his first game as a Cardinal. And he makes 2 juke moves that I had never actually seen him execute before. Like, they were as functionally fit as it comes, and I'll probably send it to you when we get off the call, because I had never actually seen that from him. And we're talking about an Adrian at that time that was 31, 32 years old doing that. Like, when he had to start doing things different because his body told him he couldn't do it that way anymore. That's what I'm talking about as being the world's best compensator and adapter. Like, no doubt, the dude's been hit with the sperm lottery, right? Like, he won the sperm lottery, as most of the players that play on Sundays have in some way, shape, or form. But it was when he had to find those other movement strategies, he had to resort to the abundance and diversity of ways of solving those problems, that he became that much better. Not just running past someone or running them over, but actually looking to make them miss, being able to do either one equally adept. Like, that's my very favorite version of Adrian. And of course, I'm biased because in that period of time in between there, he and I worked together. But it's like, yet at the same token, like that is actually the Adrian that we kind of always aspired for. And we watched clips of guys like Barry, and yet what I realized over time there, Justin, is like each one of these players is a snowflake. Each one of them is different from the other. Just like no two movement problems are the same, neither are any two solutions. You should be looking for your own authentic, creative, and honest expression of your movement skill. And I took that and stole that from Bruce Lee, of course, because that was his whole thought and premise behind his art of Jeet Kune Do, to use no way as to way. Like that is the only way, is to use no way, to find whatever way fits to the what is.
Yeah. Like that's kind of a mic drop moment. Why don't you talk about the paper, and then we'll let you go to respect your time and your day.
No, I could do this all day long. Obviously,
so could I. Like I could talk with you all. Like that's the problem, is like I could sit here and just talk with you all day.
I love it. Are you speaking about the Bruce Lee paper that we put out?
No, the one that you talked about back in 2022.
Oh yeah, okay.
You guys wrote.
Yeah, and I did put out a Bruce Lee paper actually talking about Bruce Lee's ideas in contemporary skill acquisition. So I definitely implore people to go check that out too. But that paper in 2022 was kind of came as a premise of something that I was witnessing and seeing. The problems that I was identifying in practice and training, the gaps, not only within the literature, but the gaps within practice, right? This disconnection between the problem and environment from the solver and the solution. So there was a disconnection. We were taking and isolating, decontextualizing things, taking and separating the problem in the environment away from the solver in the solution. People were doing that in both literature and practice. So myself, along with my colleague at Emergence and Tyler Yerby, a couple of skill acquisition geniuses, and Keith Davids and Carl Woods and Will Roberts, we all came together. And now those guys don't really know much about American football, and I think they would admit that. But they know a lot about viewing movement behavior in sport across context. So we brought this authorship team together to present this new way of looking at it in American football. And it was really the first paper in applying an ecological dynamics rationale, which just means to focus our scale and scope of analysis on the mutual reciprocal nature between a performer and environment. And we took that and used that as our theme, or our golden thread that we pulled upon. We started to really kind of center this idea of game speed being about this more holistic, integrated movement problem-solving process. We talked about like how I analyze movement behaviors on field in context and use that to inform our practice and learning and training environment design. And then we use certain examples from Bill Belichick and Jerry Rice, kind of talking about Jerry Rice being, 4'6", 4'7" in his pro day, but on game day, he doesn't move like that 4'6", 4'7". He moves like someone much, much faster than that because of the way he sees the field and the way that he's able to execute through the solving of problems. We talked about the design of slices and snippets of the game that we've already referenced, the manipulation of constraints to afford or offer certain opportunities to act for the player. And ultimately in there, Justin, case study number one is my work with Everson Griffin, four-time Pro Bowler here from the Minnesota Vikings.
Dude's a freak.
Yeah, anyway, and we're talking about.
If you're not aware, he's a freak.
Yeah,
he's
you're
awesome.
talking. And I had the pleasure and the blessing to be able to work with Everson from the year after his rookie season. So we spent a dozen years together, and that year that I talk about in the case study, in the example, was actually in relation to when more athletic quarterbacks were coming onto the scene. We started to see the Aaron Rodgers, the Patrick Mahomes, the Lamar Jacksons, the Josh Allens of the world, and we knew the game was changing, and we had to change some things within his craft as a pass rusher to become more intentional and adaptable around those changing problems. I actually use that as a case study there to illustrate what can be done in the learning or practice environment. And of course, some of the constraints that we manipulated to ask Everson's movement behaviors to unfold differently than what they had prior to that point, even though he was already a Pro Bowler 2 times at that time when that case study was written. So this constant state of adaptability is really where we centered most of our attention. And we really tried to kind of bring practice and theory together in that paper. It was published in Sports Coaching Review. And we wanted to speak to the coaches, but we wanted to do right to stand on the shoulders of the giants who had come before in motor control and motor learning at the same time. And so that paper is one that we often point to. Of course, then I mentioned the Bruce Lee paper, which I would definitely was much more of an accessible, because most people will geek out about watching Bruce Lee. I could see much of the audience here kind of gravitating there too. And we center our conversation about using Bruce Lee's ideas from before he died in Jeet Kune Do to apply them in today's practice and training environments as well. Really centering our conversations around that using no way is the way, that honest expression, chasing authenticity, and then ultimately what we can all do to use our own experience to put any information through, including that which what we've talked about today, to absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and add what is uniquely your own to what we do within our craft. So it's a lot of labor of love there, obviously, but I want to make sure that we give credit where credit is due to those right people as well that have obviously changed and shaped the way I view the world.
Dude, I could talk to you for hours. Could you please send me that paper? Send me the AP clip, because I'm going to look in. Like, this has been an absolute pleasure, brother. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us. And yeah, I look forward to being able to connect now that I'm back in the Midwest and out here in Iowa.
And I definitely get down in that direction. So my wife, Justin, is from Iowa. So we do get down in that neck of the woods once in a while, Cedar Rapids area. And I will definitely keep you posted as we do. But obviously the pleasure is all mine. I'm very grateful for you and the platform, but also grateful for what you're doing across the performance community. Much love to you for putting this type of thing together and continuing that legacy to just go and grow and to give back to evolve the field. I appreciate you.
Appreciate it, man. You have a great rest of the day.
You got it, buddy.
Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. Why don't you celebrate by watching more videos just like it? You can also help us on our quest to placate the algorithm gods by liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting. Thank you.